Good morning, church family. This is Pastor Jim, and I just wanted to share with you a reading from Joshua, actually the book of Judges, which tells the beginning of the book of Judges tells of the end of Joshua's life and then the people of Israel going into the land that God had promised to them. Joshua dismissed the people. The people of Israel went each to his own inheritance to take possession of the land. And then in Judges chapter 1, verse 7, it reads this: "And the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great work that the Lord had done for Israel." And then it says Joshua died at the age of 110, and that whole generation died, even the elders who outlived Joshua. And then in verse 10 it says, "And there arose another generation after them who did not know the work of the Lord, or did not know the Lord, or the work that he had done for Israel." And it says later on that that next generation, whenever the judge that they had at the time died, they turned back and were more corrupt than their fathers, going after other gods, serving them and bowing down to them. They did not drop any of their practices or their stubborn ways. The people that next generation who came, who did not know the Lord and did not know the work of the Lord, worshiped the Baals and the Ashtoreths of the Canaanites. And God says in verse 21 of chapter 2 of Judges, "I will no longer drive out before them any of the nations that Joshua left when he died, in order to test Israel by them whether they will take care to walk in the way of the Lord as their fathers did or not." And this beginning part of the book of Judges portrays a cycle that repeats itself in many generations, where you have one generation who knows the Lord and knows the work of the Lord. Then you have a second generation that maybe doesn't know the Lord personally, but they're familiar with the work of the Lord. They're familiar with the ways of the church. They're familiar with what God does and how things operate, so to speak. But then you have another generation after that who doesn't know the Lord and doesn't know the work of the Lord. And they turned away. And there's always that danger of that next generation turning away from the Lord and not following in the way that they have been taught. And that's one of the greatest challenges for Christian parents as we have children and grandchildren, is to not only instruct them in the way of the Lord, but also to pray for them and to plead for God on their behalf that they would know him personally. I can remember talking to an elderly woman, Dorothy, when we lived in Florida, and her two sons were pastors. And I asked her, I said, "How did you ensure that your two sons had such a strong relationship with the Lord? What did you do? What were the things that made that happen?" And she replied very wisely. She said, "Well, you can't give your children the relationship with the Lord that you want them to have. That relationship has to come from the Lord himself." And that's the challenge that we face as Christian parents and grandparents, is to ensure that our children are familiar with the work of the Lord and what God is doing in our lives. And when we mess up as parents or grandparents, we confess our sin to them and we admit to them when we've been wrong. But we pray for them as well, that they would know the Lord in a personal way. And so I hope that this encourages you to just present yourself before the Lord each day and say, "Lord, how can I make it clear through my life to my children and grandchildren? How can I make the work of the Lord clear to them in my life? And how can I present them opportunities to know the Lord in a personal way?" I hope that you'll think about that today, and God bless.